Alright, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with a quick deck overview for a deck that has seen a tiny bit of a resurgence lately. That is 5-color Niv to Light. Now that is named after the cards Niv-Mizzet Reborn and Bring to Light. Bring to Light is a tutor effect that as you put mana colors into it, you can search for an instant, sorcery, or creature with a mana value that equal to or less. So 5, 4, 3, whatever, depending on how much mana you poured into it. And then the other namesake card, Niv-Mizzet Reborn, allows you to look at the top 10 cards of your library. For each color and the color pair, you get to put one of those cards in your hand. Now this card has definitely fallen out of favor since Modern Horizons 2 and such. This used to be a somewhat relevant part of the format, but you know, as the pitch elementals came into the format and creativity became a bigger part of the format, this deck has kind of been overshadowed as an over-the-top mid-range deck. The rest of the deck, you know, you get to play a bunch of good cards. You obviously play Abundant Growth and Utopia Sprawls to set up your mana. You get to play Prismatic Ending and Leyline Binding just to facilitate better removal spells. And then you play a plethora of gold spells to be able to get off of your Niv-Mizzet triggers. You have Lightning Helix to be able to gain a little bit of life against aggro decks, as well as potentially Pressure Planeswalkers, Run-In 6, and Teferi, the tag team of these 4 or 5 color soup piles. One of Abrupt Decay to deal with a lot of random things. Expressive Iteration, one of the most powerful cards in the format as far as card selection and a little bit of card advantage. However, in a deck that's as clunky as this, can be a little bit awkward, although you're mainly using this to dig mana. Valky is a nice Bring to Light target because you can Bring to Light for Valky and then cast the Tybalt the Cosmic Imposter side. Have a powerful Planeswalker. General Theros can kind of take over the game when you're casting a bunch of gold spells. Vindicate as another spot removal spell. Supreme Verdict as a sweeper. And then Gaia's Guile is a modal spell. Oftentimes can get rid of your opponent's graveyard, force them to sack a creature, put a 1/1 creature into play, or gain 4 life. Modal spell that can be very situational, but can be very powerful in certain times. And finally, Elesh Norn, one of the newer additions to the list, helps against a lot of different matchups. It's decent against Scam, decent against Amulet. That is if you can buy time to get this card down. And then Solitude, because you got to play some of the Broken Modern Horizons 2 cards. 5-color land base, you still manage to slam Boseiju in here, but a bunch of fetches, shocks, tri-lands, playing 5-color mana base, go figure. Sideboard, Orvar, can definitely tell creativity is a bit of an issue, so you have 2 copies of that for that matchup. Force of Vigor for the Hammer Time and Affinity matchups, especially Veil of Summer and Dovin's Veto when you're fighting over counter spells and such. Crumble to Dust, very good against Tron, Amulet, those kind of decks. Supreme Verdict, fairly decent when you need a 3rd sweeper against certain decks. Unmoored Ego as a 2nd copy whenever you need to deal with combo decks, whether it be Creativity, Titan, potentially decks like Rhinos are living in. And 4 copies of the Chalice of the Void. This is good against a plethora of decks in the format, good against Cascade decks, good against decks with a bunch of 1-drops. So, you know, decks like Death Shadow, decks like Burn, decks like Bogles, decks like Murktide potentially. So you have a lot of tools to bring in. Deck is the ultimate tool of flexibility, but does have its weaknesses that we'll talk about as we get into other versions. Version a little bit different, still seeing a lot of the same tools. We'll go over cards that are a little bit different. Assassin's Trophy is kind of like Abrupt Decay, except it can hit anything, including lands, and then your opponent gets to search their library for a basic land card. Now this is a little bit more relevant against bigger mana Planeswalkers, things out of Tron, blowing up their lands, etc. Obviously, it does come with the downside of them getting a land, much like Path to Exile, but, you know, a little bit more utility in what it hits. More copies of Gaia's Guile, we've already kind of talked about what that does. And then the rest of the list, not really a whole lot different with this version, although it is a 60-card version of Niv, so you're a little bit trimmed down on what you have. Sideboard, obviously, Leyline Binding, we've already kind of talked about. Thoughtseize, when you need a little bit of disruption for combo and control. Veil of Summer, when you're fighting over those counter spells. Lavinia, very good hate against something like Cascade decks, also can be relevant against cards like decks like Tron, Green Tron especially. Vindicates when you need more unmitigated, what's the word I'm looking for? Unrestricted removal spells, can blow up lands or anything really. 4th copy of Gaia's Guile, someone really doesn't like losing to graveyard decks or being able to edict things. Unmoored Ego we've already kind of talked about. Fractured Gust is kind of force of vigor on crack. The downside is this does blow up some of your own stuff, especially Utopia Sprawls, potentially copies of Abundant Growth if you have that running around, but very good against decks like Hammer, Affinity, any deck playing Urza Saga, etc. Can also be reasonable against a deck like Amulet that does play a surprising amount of artifacts and enchantments, whether it be Amulet, the Mycosynth Gardens Copying Amulet, copies of Dryad, etc. So this is a 60 color version of Niv. Things are a little bit more concentrated, but still doing a large number of the same thing. Another 80 version copy of Niv, seeing a lot of the same cards. In fact, I don't think Prismatic Command, nice modal card, Shatter Shock, Looting Effect, and Destroy Target Artifact. I guess that's a Shatter. It can make treasure tokens to help facilitate casting some of your bigger spells. I guess the other card I forgot to kind of cover as we were going through this, is just kind of glossing over because it's always in these 4 or 5 color soup piles, is Omnath. Now Omnath, very powerful mid-range threat, helps to stabilize against decks like Burn and such, can also lead to some very powerful turns where you go play Omnath, play Fetch Land, crack it, maybe cast a Bring to Light or a Niv, really pull ahead on advantage and tempo that way. But that said, not really a surprising thing in these kind of soup piles. Sideboard of this version, a little bit different, but a lot of the same things. Spell Pierce, once again, way to kind of fight counter spells and stuff. Magus to the Moon, a little bit greedy, but I guess if you're running enough basics, you can kind of get away with this. This version's running 1 of each basic, so the Millennial AP a little bit clunkier, but you do have the ability to fetch each of the basics in this version for Magus to the Moon. This can be relevant against decks like Tron, Amulet, relevant against Urza Saga decks, etc. Force of Vigor and Fracture and Gust we've already kind of covered. Endurance is an interesting one. Help to fight the graveyard decks. Very similar to how Kaya's Guile does, so someone like this really doesn't like losing to graveyard decks. Lavinia, obviously very good against the Cascade decks. Dovin's Veto, Unmoored Ego, kind of rounding out the packages. Now, in the gameplay video that you'll see probably released after the deck guide here. The biggest problem with the deck is clunkiness and speed in a format that has become largely very efficient and very powerful. Now, the modern format isn't as fast as it's ever been. This isn't like a combo winner where you have like Crackling Ironworks and or Eldrazi running around or any of that kind of stuff. So the format isn't degenerate, but it is very efficient. So a deck like this that really doesn't start until turn 2 at best case scenario does have some problems against a fast aggro deck. A deck like Burn can be a problem if you don't draw, your Helixes and Kaya's Guiles and Omnaths. Tribal decks that can go under you a little bit can be a bit of a problem. And the other side of the equation is the deck is very slow to close. Yes, you do have Omnaths. Yes, you do have Niv-Mizzets. General Pharaohs can go nuts and make a bunch of dudes, but much like a deck like 4-color Elementals, this deck is very slow to close. So that leaves the door for your opponent to top deck, get back into the game, potentially overpower you if they're a deck like Amulet or Tron. So you're kind of in this like mid-range vortex heck that the format is in some regards, in that you can get tempoed out by a bunch of counter spells, or you can kind of get overpowered by decks like Creativity and such. So this deck is a very good mid-range deck, but can also struggle to close games. Now that said, if you like a deck that is almost infinitely customizable, this could certainly be the deck for you. If you like a deck that can, have an answer for every situation as long as you're okay with it being a little bit clunky, or if you like a deck that just likes to play all the good cards but doesn't want to play, Furies and well, it plays most of the Modern Horizons 2 broken cards, don't lie there. But it doesn't have to play all of the broken Modern Horizons cards like Elementals does. This could certainly be a deck for you. It's a little bit off the beaten path. And if you like having a toolbox engine, this deck could certainly be for you. It's a deck that I enjoy playing, even though I know it's not particularly good. But it is a deck that's fun to play, pick up and play every now and again. So it's a deck that I'm glad to see back a little bit, and certainly a deck I would like to cover more on the channel if it becomes a relevant part of the meta. But a deck you should be aware of and what it's capable of. So if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for our next Modern video.